That said, I can absolutely, I think, assure you that a number of these risk factors are related to the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And a recent study that came out, in fact, just a few months ago, makes this argument quite clearly. Some of these estimates are based on mathematical models. There are many assumptions involved in this, but basically the claim was that about 21% of dementia cases is related to a sedentary lifestyle, not being physically active. And I'm not talking about going to the gym or lifting weights or these sorts of things. I'm talking about basic walking, for example, 30 minutes 3 times a week. There are many people in these studies who, for health reasons or for personal preference reasons, simply don't engage in physical activity. And 20% of dementias or Alzheimer's diseases are suggested to be related to that. And you see a lot of other usual suspects down here as well. Obviously things like smoking, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, all things very much within our control. And according to Yaffe, the principal investigator on this specific study, if we could cut the number of people who are experiencing these various conditions by even 10%, there would be 1 million fewer people who would have dementia. And if you could cut it by 20% or 25%, there would be 3 to 4 million fewer people who would have Alzheimer's disease or dementia. So an important consideration. This is something I play up in my lab quite a bit as well, and I certainly have some grad students, I think, who have a more central interest in this topic than I do. But I think it's a critical question, and people often ask it. Is age just a number? And my response is yes, it is just a number. Whether you're 60 or you're 70 or you're 90, it indicates certainly that you've lived for a period of time, but simply telling me what age you are is not going to allow me to definitively say how good or bad you are in terms of performing certain tasks, how good or bad your relative health might be, and so on. So age is a very important risk factor. Increasing age is associated with increasing disease, but this graphic here is meant to show that a 70-year-old and a 70-year-old side by side aren't necessarily the same individuals. A 40-year-old and a 40-year-old side by side aren't necessarily the same individuals. And so what the graph shows here on this y-axis, or this vertical axis, the higher you are on this graph, the better your cognitive function would be. And we're plotting that as a function of chronological age. So here's the cognitive function on average for a 20-year-old. Here's the cognitive function on average for a 30-year-old. And what you see is that, of course, with increasing age, on average, our memory performance, our reasoning ability, these things are showing some declines. This is not earth-shattering news. But this gray area here indicates that there is a massive range in terms of how well or how poorly any one individual within these groups may be performing. So if I take the average 80-year-old, for example, some are so healthy that they're performing near their upper bound, and they're performing not unlike a 40 or a 30 or a 20-year-old. And there are other 80-year-olds based in this distribution who are performing more like an individual who is 100 years of age on average. And what accounts for that variability? Well, it's not how many years you've lived. What accounts for it depends on a whole host of factors. In part, your biological makeup, but really also how you've lived your life, your behaviors, your lifestyle preferences, and what we refer to as environmental influences. So 70 is not 70. Makes me feel good. Anyways, I know that there's things that I can do that, that will help me. Okay, in this second section here of my discussion, what I really want to focus on are 2 types of training interventions that are commonly done in the experimental or cognitive literature. And one group of scientists focuses an awful lot on memory training or brain training games. And I'm sure to a person, everybody in the room has either read about these or perhaps you've got your own software you're running on your home computer. Maybe you've got your own little Nintendo handheld and you're playing a number of these brain training games as well. So to begin, I want to talk about the evidence for cognitive training. And the reason why, I think, is as much an ethical one as it is a science one. This is a massive enterprise right now. It's a multi-million-dollar and probably going to verge on billion-dollar industry in the not-too-distant future. Some of these brain training games, they certainly won't harm you. Some of them are relatively inexpensive. But some of them require quite a cost outlay, and if you're contemplating spending $400 or $500 on a piece of software that somebody's claiming is going to keep you mentally sharp for the rest of your life, I think they've got an ethical responsibility to back that up. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been some reasonable science that's come online that does speak to this issue. And so what I want to talk about here is specifically these commercial training programs, the ones that are being marketed to us on the late night infomercials, the ones that Best Buy is selling, and the ones that we're being bombarded by in terms of advertisements in the popular media. Do they really do what they claim? Do they keep us mentally sharp? Or better yet, do they improve our cognition quite broadly? And every study has its limitations. This one does as well. It was based on a younger sample, ranging, I think, from about the early 20s or so into the late 50s or early 60s. So there were some critiques of it from that perspective. But there's a primary thing that I want to draw your attention to. There were 3 groups of people. There was a control group who didn't participate in these brain training games at all. And then there were 2 experimental groups. One experimental group was trained based on laboratory or IQ type tasks that we typically use in a university context. My guess is that all of us have completed or perhaps participated in experiments before, and at least for those of you who have, you know some of these tasks are a little artificial, contrived, they don't make a lot of sense, and you're wondering what we can actually tell by administering those. And another group who's actually completing these commercial training programs. And these types of tasks are based on more everyday types of cognitive abilities, or at least seemingly everyday. So you might practice math, or you might practice memory, where you're given a list of words and you have to repeat a certain number of words back within a set period of time, and so on. What unequivocally they find based on these studies is that if you train on either one of these sets of measures, if you train on the university measures or if you train on these commercial programs, that you get better at the things that you're practicing. Well, hallelujah, that's a good thing. If I'm spending 6 weeks training on these things, if I'm not at least getting better at what I'm training on, I'm not going to be happy about it. So I'm sure they were pleased with that aspect, but that is not the litmus test, and it's not what's promised to you when you buy one of these commercial packages. What's promised to you is that if you train on these things, not only will you get better on these tasks, but you'll get better on many other things, cognitive tasks specifically within your life. It's going to help you balance your checkbook better. It'll help you in your retirement financial planning better. It will do this and that and so on. And I can also say, at least based on this study, without equivocation, there is no evidence that training on these commercial programs, and there's even no evidence for training on these university tasks, that you are going to experience sweeping improvements in your cognitive ability in other areas of your life. So my brief public service announcement there is save your money. I've got some cheaper ways that you can actually accomplish the goal much better. And please don't pass that message along, because I'll have a lot of angry marketers of these tasks ringing my phone off the hook, arguing that they do indeed work. They do, but they have very, very small effect sizes. Does it really make sense to you to put that much effort into training on crossword puzzles if at the end of the day you're simply going to graduate from the Times columnist to the New York Times word jumble within a 6-week period? I mean, that would be a pretty good advance, actually. I'd enjoy that, but it's not going to help improve other things in your daily life. This, however, the second type of research training, largely focuses on physical activity and exercise. And there's really been an explosion of research in this area as well. And I can shamelessly say without equivocation that exercise training does work. I get these phone calls a lot as well, and people are always saying, should I train on this cognitive task? Should I do this? If you want me to force you to tell you to do one thing, let's get out every day, go for a walk. That type of physical activity, more than anything else that we've at least seen in the lab, has marked benefits in terms of preserving and perhaps even improving your cognitive function. And this was a seminal article published in one of the best scientific journals in the world, Nature, incredibly hard to get into. They see a submission for me and see my name, and they just reject it immediately. 124 previously sedentary adults participated in this, so it was a well-controlled study. None of the participants in the study were active before, and they randomly assigned these individuals to 2 groups. A group of individuals who were doing nothing more than walking. So we're not talking about marathon running. We're not talking about working up a sweat to a point that you feel horrible after. We're talking about aerobic activity. It requires air, it gets your heart rate up, but it's not that taxing per se. And in comparison, they had an anaerobic training group that wasn't going to get somebody's heart rate up really. They were just doing some basic stretching and toning. And they wanted to see which one of those conditions would really improve performance the most. After training, this darker blue bar shows they almost improved by a full 100% for individuals who were in this walking group. If you look at the toning group and you compare these 2 bars, you see that they're virtually flat. Now, toning or weightlifting, stretching, these sorts of things are important for other reasons in your life. Warding off osteoporosis, for example, would be a critical reason that one should stretch or do some weight-bearing activity. But it isn't necessarily going to confer any great benefits in terms of your cognitive function. The other interesting thing that has come out of Art Kramer's lab is more, well, at least for me, it's more exciting. Not only can you improve your cognitive function if you're engaging in physical activity, but it's actually saving your brain as well. And this is absolutely normative, nothing to be frightened of here as we get older. And by normative, I mean it absolutely happens to every single one of us, no matter what you do. The average individual is losing somewhere between about 15 to 25% of the total volume of their brain between about 30 and 90 years of age. And the fitness studies show that if you're walking regularly, you can actually stave off some of that decline. It's not that you're adding brain volume, you're not necessarily creating new tissue, although I have some colleagues in an area of neuroplasticity that would argue that that is possible too. But you see here on the left-hand side, it's hard to see the trace outline of the brain here, but this is what we would call the glass brain underlying there. And more color here is worse. These are all the various regions of the brain that are showing declines in tissue as we get older. But for those people who are physically active, you see in the blue color here, the extent of the coloration of the brain is not as broad. And what that indicates when you compare this one on the left to the one on the right is that people who are active are actually losing less tissue. And they're losing less tissue in some pretty important regions for everyday function, including cognitive performance.